Well, hello and welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech content and wisdom from the world of marketing. As always, my co-host is the man on a mission to keep marketing simple, the host of the Roger video series and the author of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Marketing Plans. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much. And of course, you are also a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. You are the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Please welcome everyone, Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to you and listeners for your support, Roger. This is episode 39.
Episode 39. We're creeping towards the big 5-0.
It's a big one, as I say, where I come from. Not really, just as I say, we're around here. Shall we begin with In the News?
In the news. According to research by Kantar, the UK was the fastest adopter of online grocery shopping in Western markets last year, with more than £1 in every £10 spent online.
Where Premier Inn has invested in its first major brand building campaign for 3 years. The £20 million campaign, multi-channel, hoped to take advantage of the quote-unquote pent-up demand for staycations.
Facebook has introduced a new audio mini player that allows listeners to enjoy music and podcasts from Spotify directly within Facebook without switching between apps.
Well, according to research by Ofcom, 62% of UK adults played video games and spent £7 billion, Roger, on gaming last year as Britain sought forms of entertainment to cope with lockdown measures.
For the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020, which begins in July 2021, the organisers have added digital games for mass participation in order to build excitement and reach new Olympic audiences.
Google Annuals Conference I/O 2021 is going ahead from the 18th to the 20th of May, and its CEO 𝗧𝗵𝗲 has promised a first look at the Android 12, new Google search features, the new Pixel 5a and much more.
TikTokification is the real thing, according to thedrum.com, as the short social videos first introduced by Vine and Snapchat can now be seen all over the web and television.
And finally, interaction designer and researcher 𝗪𝗲𝗲 from the Da Vinci Innovation Center has invented the iCam, a webcam shaped like the human eye that can see you, blink at you, look around and observe you. That is not creepy at all, Roger.
That's not creepy at all. Reminds me of those amazing sweets from Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Square sweets that look round.
There's something about
because they have little eyes.
Yeah, there's something about the human eye that when it particularly follows you is just not great. So, I mean, it is an experiment whether or not the humanification of tech can help somebody feel more at home and comfortable. But we shall see what the results are. But I wouldn't be convinced.
No, not at all. So, just going back to the beginning, Premier Inn investing in brand building. Now they're using this term staycation. Now, I've got a problem with this staycation. I guess it's an American word, isn't it?
It is.
And the UK media seems to have adopted it for people who go on holiday within their own country. So if you go on holiday in the UK and you're a UK resident, then that's a staycation. Now, to me, if you live in the UK and you go on holiday in the UK, that's a holiday. If I live in the UK and I go to France on holiday, that's a holiday. I always assumed that a staycation was when you actually have a holiday, but you stay in your own actual house where you actually live all the time. I'm probably being pedantic.
Well, no. It's all about the power of words and the meaning of words.
Yeah.
You're staying where you are. So, case in point, very, very soon I'll take some time off work, but I'll stay at home. For me as well, it suggests, it's almost like a lesser form of holiday. It's not as good as, traveling. My kind of small reservation is, of course, I've used Premier Inn happily for many years as a business traveler. And I must confess, Roger, if I wanted to have a holiday, not a staycation, a holiday, they would not be top of my list in terms of a place to stay. But nonetheless, I want to wish them good luck. And the adverts are all right, actually. I've seen, I think, the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 campaign that I've seen on television at the moment. So we do want the brand to do well, but I still struggle with this idea of premiering equal a holiday destination. I just don't have that in mind.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, but I've never really thought about it before. But yeah, I stay in Premier Inns when I used to travel on business, and they're great for business. You know, comfy bed, somewhere to put your laptop, quite functional. But yeah, you wouldn't equate it with holiday luxury or a hotel on a beach somewhere or beside a lake, would you?
Now, Roger, have you contributed to the £7 billion spent on video games over the last 12 months?
Oh, I'm undoubtedly have done that. Although, I know you're a massive gamer, and I've been a fairly sizable gamer, but I tend to play the same games all the time. So my games of choice, as you know, Fortnite and Planet Coaster, I tend to fire those up pretty much all the time, and then sort of dip in and out of the other ones, like the fighting games and shooting games, as and when they're popular.
When I kind of spotted this item from Ofcom, which I think suggests that they're taking seriously, I kind of reflected. So normally, as in when there isn't a pandemic upon us, Roger, I would play roughly 2 games a year, as in the big games. I prefer, as you know, RPG type games, and I play a little bit on a Friday night, maybe at the weekend, and maybe 2 a year would be roughly what I would do. The last one that I played before the pandemic was Fallen Order, the Star Wars video game. I made a list in preparation for this podcast recording, and for the since the pandemic, so a year and a month into it, I've played 8 games.
Wow, right. That's quite a lot, isn't it?
It's a big difference, end to end. So from Spider-Man to Days Gone, which I recommend if you like zombie genre, to Metal Gear Solid 5, to currently I'm playing Assassin's Creed, Odyssey, Dragon's Age Inquisition, you name it, I've played all of them. But I didn't play, a lot more. I think it was just evenings and weekends. But I think because, again, I didn't have to travel as much, maybe I played. But it was just a big surprise to me that literally from 2 games a year, I've played 8 on this occasion.
Wow. Yeah. So what about TikTokification? I just had to bring that back up because it was such a hard word to actually say.
Well, I've noticed it. If you look at TV adverts in particular, Roger, but also shows, the Ant and Dec, Saturday Night Takeaway, all their stings, all their kind of mini adverts and kind of video content was all version of TikTok in terms of transitions and that kind of things. I'm seeing it more and more as well, even in print in terms of the layout of the typography and so on. And this kind of, let's doctify our marketing campaign. You could just imagine the language in those boardrooms. I'm kind of amused that, the public is not telling marketers what to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've said before, I'm not sure I really get TikTok and Reels and all of that sort of thing. But again, quite a lot of marketers that we know have adopted these things, and the marketing people on TikTok and Reels seem to have this thing where you obviously play some music in the background. You may be doing a little dance like this, and then you point at a corner and you get a bit of text to appear, and then you point down there and you get another little text to appear, and it is actually quite clever, Pascal. I'm not taking that away from them. But if everybody is doing that, then you don't stand out. You just look like you're doing what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and I tell people who are listening, watching to this, if you watch the adverts right now, in terms of transition from one scene to the other, it's all emulating the TikTok features and functions that people are using, as you're right, very cleverly. It's, people are so creative. But for me, it's like, well, let the consumers have their fun. Why do you have to kind of step in and forever spoil it? But also, it's only going to last. Do you remember that many years ago when there was, what was it called? The flash crowds, where people suddenly would start dancing randomly in shopping centres.
Yes,
again,
that's right.
Marketers just kind of spotted it done by normal kind of people, and suddenly went, yeah, let's do that. And I don't know, it just amuses me more than anything else.
Yeah, I think these things are fads, and they come and go. They come and go.
Absolutely. So very quickly, before we move on to our next segment, what do you think, particularly for you and I as well? I know you've been a podcaster longer than I have, but this idea of potentially our current and future audience listening to the show directly on Facebook without having to move on from the platform.
Well, it's probably a good thing in some respects, isn't it? Because I know that when we publish the links to this show within Facebook and within LinkedIn and within Twitter, the algorithm of those platforms penalizes us for posting a link which takes people away from those platforms. So if we can actually post it within those platforms and let people stay and listen, then that's got to be a win-win, because assuming we won't get penalized after that.
I welcome it from the point of view of distribution and access, you're right, because you and I keep track of the results and we know what's happening there.
Yeah.
My kind of small criticism is, of course, it's Spotify and nobody else.
Yes.
And sometimes I don't know whether there's some bit of laziness in the negotiation, because Facebook, obviously one of the largest social network out there, Spotify, one of the largest audio platforms, get together. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it has to be Spotify. Absolutely right.
Super. Well, once again, thank you, Roger, for reacting to the news. Let's slow things down, move on to the next segment, the content spotlights. So our regular viewers and listeners will know that this is one of Roger's favorite segments. We surprise each other every week with a discovery from the interweb, an article, a podcast, a video. So, Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Well, Pascal, it's another article from Inc. magazine, obviously the online version. And this article is actually written by 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who's actually quite a famous keynote speaker and author and a Harvard University advocate. The headline is How to Pitch Your Ideas in 10 Minutes or Less. Use these 3 strategies to quickly grab your audience's attention. Now, again, it's one of these things I looked at and thought, nothing new here. But I did read it because it was written by 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and I've read some of his stuff before, and it's quite a short article, but I did get sucked into it. And the reason I got sucked into it is because he illustrates his 3 points differently than I've seen illustrated recently. And at least the first one reminded me of something that I've not thought of for a long time. So the whole point is that he starts off with this obvious fact now that we're all time poor. We've all been living through this pandemic. We've all been spending a lot of time sat in front of Zoom calls and monitor screens. And it might have been in the past that pitches took an hour. It might have been in the past, as you and I know, that a keynote speech was 45 minutes. But things have been squeezed down now because people's online attention spans are so much lower, and 10 minutes seems to be around about the time when people start to lose interest, whether it's a keynote speech or whether it's a pitch or whether it's just a conversation about anything. And we've discussed this before on the show, where we said to people, if you're doing a speech, something's got to change every 10 minutes, whether it's you being replaced by a different speaker or at least your location changes so that it sort of jolts the audience back into attention. So his argument is now that, even when the pandemic's over, maybe we should retain this, because simplicity is great and focusing in on those 10 minutes to pitch something is absolutely key. So going very quickly through the 3 ideas. The first one, again, the heading, it doesn't really say much. What's the idea? But this is what really intrigued me here, because he uses a journalistical technique, which is called don't bury the lead. Now, I remember this from going on journalism courses years ago, and when I used to do a lot of PR work at big corporate and I was talking to journalists, the lead is one of the most important parts of an article that a journalist writes. Now, if you read any newspaper article, any magazine article, after the headline, the first sentence of that article is what they call the lead, and they pretty much put all the information that you're going to read during that article within that first sentence. It's the who, why, what, how, etc., in some order, mixing up those vital points. But, journalists spend more time sometimes crafting the lead than they actually do crafting the full article. And so he says, don't just fire out that first sentence and then move on. Even if it's at the end when you're writing your pitch, come back to it and recraft that first sentence, because that first sentence, just like the article that you're reading in a newspaper, has got to suck the listener, suck the reader in to excite them and to point the way towards the ultimate call to action that is going to be in this pitch. And, there's other things like making sure that if there's a really important piece of information that you really want people to remember, it's often useful to put it at the end of the sentence. So we had 80% growth in sales this year, everybody. Isn't that great? Is a nice thing to say, but you might start off by saying this year has been an incredible year, everybody, because this year sales grew by 80%. And you see how much more powerful that is by including the rip-roaring figure at the end of the sentence. So I just loved that, Pascal. It reminded me of this journalistic lead thing that I've not thought about for years. So, and I've been trying it out with some of the things that I've been writing myself since I read this article. The second thing, again, not rocket science, but it's the what's in it for me. What's the payoff? What's the problem that you're going to solve? And this is where you demonstrate that you understand the needs of your customer and how your product or service is going to solve that customer's problem better and preferably different to everybody else, which is something you hear me going on about in my book quite a lot and on my own podcast. And finally, can you include a real story within there? A story from your own personal experience, either yourself or a customer or a colleague, somebody who's had an example, maybe with your product or service, somebody who's written a review, somebody who's done a testimonial, but tell it as a story. And try to, and I know you're a massive fan of storytelling and the hero's journey and the setup and the middle and the end. Try to build those techniques into it. Now, this sounds like quite a tall order to do all of this in 10 minutes. But what 𝗏𝗵𝗲's saying in his article is, again, it's all about choosing the right words and then editing it down so that it fits within that 10-minute segment. So that was it, Pascal. It's actually quite simple, quite easy, but I sometimes love seeing these articles that just remind me and generate a spark and make me think about things that perhaps I've either forgotten or I need to be revising.
And like you said, very timely reminder, because people will need to communicate on an ongoing basis for quite some time. I mean, I always say to people, how long do you think you'll be trading for? 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years? Yeah. You need to find a way to communicate that is good for you, so you feel obviously re-energized each time you communicate, but also you need to find a way of communicating where there's flexibility and you can re-explore your key messages. But the way to do that is to use those methods that, obviously the article reminds us of. And sometimes, like you, always think, is it time to move on to a different method? Is it time to move on to a different way of thinking? But like you, every single time I'm brought back to the basics because they work so damn well.
Yeah. Yeah, the basics work damn well, and they have done for many, many years. And again, you can look all over the internet for templates and flow charts and everything like this. But often, it's the beginning, middle, and end. It's the hero's journey. It's the problem, agitate, solution. The absolute basic structures of pitching and writing are still the best.
And for me, it's this idea of the press release, which again is not taught sufficiently, I believe, whether you're taking a course or you're being taught by your mentor or your senior team members. But to me, the press release, if you know how to do the press release, you will know how to do all other forms of written content. And I'm going to almost leave it as that, as a statement, because I'm going to start to go on my soapbox about what people have done with their marketing efforts by doing tweets more often than they've done press releases, Roger. And I think as a result of which, the skills have been slightly eroded, or it's still time to catch it for sure. And I think once again, your selection this week is a great reminder for that.
So Pascal, I've done mine. You hit me with yours.
Well, once again, even though we do not talk to each other, we do not confer and share notes, I have chosen article about writing. Now, this one has a title of B2B content isn't boring unless your writing is. And this is by Jonathan Crossfield, who is an independent storyteller, content creator, writer, visual storyteller. He's really an accomplished kind of communicator, and he wrote this article for the Content Marketing Institute. Now, I've brought content from the Institute a few times, but this is the first time I've read anything from Jonathan Crossfield, and I'm really, really pleased I came across literally this kind of item. It's a long-form content, I would argue. I didn't count the words, but it's one where you want to take your time to go through essentially an example of what it means by avoiding to being boring. So the starting point says, the B2B industry needs to stop making excuses saying, well, because we are B2B, we can't be as interesting as those guys from B2C. So that's our lot. Say that's an excuse and we must move on. And I'm sure you've heard that excuse, Roger, many times. So what he's talking about is more misjudgment, misunderstanding, mistakes indeed. So number one, which will not surprise you, the reason why your writing may be boring, and by extension the content is boring, is because it was written to satisfy an internal audience. We're there again, Roger. That could be obviously your peers within your organization, but also the competition. So what he's saying is, once again, people are writing content to show that lot across the road that our case studies are better, or that we know more about the industry than they do, and forgetting, of course, the audience. So forget your impressing, obviously, colleagues, peers, and competitors. But that's something that we mentioned many times. One that actually I'd forgotten about, but that's true, particularly in the world of content marketing, it was saying, stop using the number of downloads as a measure of success. Because ultimately, all you've done is come up with a very good title, maybe a very good hook, or a very good landing page, but you don't know whether your content has been engaging, and you don't know whether your writing was boring or not. So you say, find different ways, which is not easy at all. Number 3, which will please you, Monsieur Roger Edwards, the man on a mission to keep marketing simple. He was saying that you want to keep the language simple and clear. And he quotes a research from I'm going to read that to you, Christopher Trudeau and the Thomas Cooley Law School, saying that 8% of people surveyed preferred clear English in legal documents, even those who had essentially the skill set and experience to understand the jargon and so on and so forth. So even though you want to impress others with your technical language, they would favor a simpler language. The other thing that he reminds everybody is, please understand, your services and your products are not interesting. The people using them are.
Yes.
So we're back to your story earlier that you mentioned. That's what makes it interesting. So stop talking about what the product is and start talking about what it does and for whom. Here's a bit of grammar for you. And then he goes on to say, well, and sometimes just be a bit daring. Just try and find some analogies, try and find some imageries, maybe create almost fiction and take your characters, your clients, maybe your colleagues, yourself into what he called an hyper-real world so that it can be more engaging. And he gives 2 examples where someone is essentially using the idea of a spy, using obviously their kind of product and services, and somebody making actually a zombie survival guide. Analogy, with regard to their product. But the other thing that I would say is this article is structured, and each of the key elements is an example on how to write in a way that is interesting. So if you read it once, it feels a little disjointed because the style keeps changing, but that is on purpose because once again, Jonathan wants to show us different ways in which you can be interesting and engaging, even though it is maybe B2B.
Yeah, again, Pascal, so many good things in there. And you're absolutely right. Of course, I'm going to approve of any article that says you've got to keep the language simple. But I guess when it's business to business, When I do my presentations and I say, you always have to talk in the language of your customer, and you should assume that their knowledge levels are really low so that you don't use jargon, that you don't use complicated language. And sometimes the business-to-business people will turn back and say, yes, Roger, but that's okay for when you're selling to the public, B2C, but when you're selling to other businesses, they're used to all this jargon, they're happy with it. And I still fight back against that, because unless you're accountants selling to accountants, it's very likely that whoever your business customer is still not going to understand your language. So if you're an IT consultant selling to accountants, you can't speak in IT speak in the same way as you can't speak in IT speak if you're selling to a man on the street, broadband or something like that, for instance. So I will still maintain that language should be brought to its most simplest level, and assume that your customer, whether it's a business customer or whether it's a man on the street customer, still has to assume that they know very little about your industry so that you don't overuse that complicated language.
And I think when I reflect on the article I've just reviewed for you, there's two things. By keeping it simple, you are actually respecting the audience and showing your approach and mindset when it comes to customer service and customer care. I care enough to simplify this. And also, frankly, I don't care whether the competition believes, for example, that I don't know my stuff because I've chosen not to use the jargon of the industry, which I think is where it plays. And secondly, I'm also so passionate about what I do. I'm going to be creative and turn this into a zombie survival guide.
Yes.
And see where that takes you.
Yeah, and again, I think this obsession that businesses have with their competitors, again, often alienates the end customer, because, there has to be an element of comparison, but when you become obsessed with them to the exclusion of your customers, and if it taints the messages that you're putting out there, then it becomes about you and it becomes about your competitors, as opposed to being about you and your customer, whether it's a business customer or consumer customer.
Super. Well, viewers and listeners, do let us know about your reaction and your thoughts on those two selections. But also, if you are a content creator, do submit your articles, videos, and podcasts to Two Geeks and Marketing Podcast. We would love to include those in our segment. But for now, Roger, let's move on to marketing, tech, and apps. So, Roger, what have you got for us this week to become better content creators?
Well, this week, Pascal, I'm going to focus in on helping you to improve your public speaking skills. Now, I've come across a couple of actually really, really interesting apps, and again, not ones that I've seen before, and the tech is actually quite impressive. The first one, it's called 𝗬𝗏𝗏, AORAI, so Orai or Ore, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it. Ore! That's what I want to say. Now, it's what you do is you put it on your phone, and preferably put it on a tripod or lean it against a bookcase or a wall, and you effectively deliver your speech or a segment of your speech. It can be 30 seconds, it can be 15 minutes, towards your phone as if you were presenting to your phone and that phone was an individual. And then it does this remarkable AI techno wizardry thing, and it analyzes your speech line by line, and it tells you things like the pace at which you went, where you might have slowed down, where you might have speeded up. It'll tell you about the tonality of your voice. Was your voice the same tone all the way through, or did you go louder, did you go quieter? It will even pick you up on filler words like and and like and things like that. And it will even, and I've no idea how it does this, but it even picks you up on the complexity of the language that you're using and repetition as well. Now, this absolutely blew me away, Pascal, and this is actually literally the free version that I'm using. So I was only having access to an absolute fraction of what it can actually do. But it was incredibly accurate, so incredibly accurate. And in some respects, I was really pleased because it told me the things that I thought it would tell me like that. My voice does go up and it does come down, and I do go faster and then I do go slower. It picked me up on more filler words than I was expecting. I didn't think I used particularly ums and ahs that much. Maybe it was because I was playing around with it. But absolutely remarkable. If you are prepared to pay for the full version, it's got all sorts of extra functionality, but it's even got some exercises that you can go through to try and help you with your pacing and help you with your tonality and that sort of thing, and help you to practice to eliminate filler words. So absolutely remarkable. I guess the caveat is that it's about the delivery. And yes, you can be the best deliverer of information, but it doesn't take away from the fact that your content needs to be good in the first place. And what this app isn't going to do is tell you how good your content is. So you could actually be stood up there talking total and utter rubbish, and it would still analyse your pace and your tonality and your filler words and all of that sort of thing. So it's not a substitute for good content, but it will help you with the delivery, and I think it's really quite remarkable. The second thing is, at first I saw this and thought this is actually just a teleprompter. And it's one of these teleprompters that you can actually put onto your phone or onto an iPad. And if you're happening to be speaking at a venue and you're on a lectern or something like that, you could use it as a teleprompter to actually read your speech. Now, I would never, ever advocate that. You could use it, for example, if you were doing a video and you have a camera pointed at you, you could have the teleprompter part hanging just below your camera. I've never been able to do that, Pascal. I don't know about you, because it makes my eyes go from side to side like that, which absolutely freaks everybody out. But the teleprompting thing is incidental. What I didn't realise is this thing has all sorts of other things built into it that public speakers have traditionally used. Like, some people don't like to have scripts, but they like to have cue cards. This Prompt Smart Pro, as it's called, can replicate cue cards. It can also replicate a fully written speech. It can also replicate slides. It can also replicate bullet points. And of course, it's integrated into your app, and it could be built into PowerPoint as well. So two really interesting apps. Never come across them before. The first one was totally blew my mind when I saw what it could do, and I have toyed with the idea of buying the full version. But even this teleprompter one, which isn't as sophisticated, could still be useful for those people who still find that it benefits their presentation if they can have cue cards and that sort of thing.
Do you know, I don't think we've had apps yet about public speaking or simply speaking, delivering, obviously messaging through the spoken words. So I'm really impressed. That's really, really quite exciting. So yeah, I think like you, the first one really intrigues me, only because it seems so clever. And back to teleprompters, I can't use them, and that's more of a skill and training on my part. So I tend to do without and just learn my text really well. That's so that's what I do. But I know some people really swear by them, and you know, that's excellent. So for me, Roger, I want to go back to revisit. I want to revisit two apps that we've mentioned in the past, because they've got some new features that I'm really excited about. It's about video. The first one is 𝗬𝗵𝗲, spelled S-U-B-L-Y. And you may remember that we spoke about it a few months ago now. It allows to caption and subtitle videos, as they say, automatically in a few seconds using really, really smart AI and in terms of the understanding of the spoken word. So what you can do with 𝗬𝗵𝗲, up to, before I mention the new features, you can upload a video. We could upload, for example, this episode of Two Geeks, and if we recognize that we are speaking in English, well, certainly we do try our very best, and then you will see the words, you know, introduced. So you can go on the editor and correct, you know, the odd words that have been misunderstood by AI. You can then change the aspect ratio. So you and I prefer landscape because of our love for all things movies, but you could go square, and you can also go portrait, and you can add branding and all sorts of things. And this has been really quite a powerful tool to use. Just about a few days ago, they have introduced translation. So now, not only can you have obviously the English subtitled version of this podcast, but if you wanted to grow your audience, or simply engage your audience in different territories. You can then go from English to German, English to Arabic, English to Norwegian. The list of languages is quite extensive. Now, this is still done by a machine, so somebody who is obviously a native speaker, certainly who has a good command of the translated language, is to go in and correct. But that would be occasional. The speed at which you can really work is quite exceptional, and then you can save the video accordingly. Or what you can do is download just the text file, whether it's the SRT or VTT, and add that onto YouTube or indeed your editing software. But the translation, again, within seconds, to go from English to German or English to Norwegian, to then quickly tidy up and correct, is quite a plus for exporters, podcasters, content creators who want to grow their audience. So in my case, where before this was possible, I had to go in and manually translate the English version to French for my French audience. So that's a big plus. So 𝗬𝗲, well done for adding the translation service. So next one is KineMaster, the #1 video editing software for mobile phones, but also one that is very complex. So you know, an audience will know, this is for advanced users who really want to push the editing. Pretty much everything you do, Roger, for your vlog, you can do on KineMaster. They've introduced a whole raft of new templates to speed up your vlogging, and it is quite impressive. They introduced new transitions, new styling, so within seconds you can go for retro for people like you and I, all the way to TikTok style, to one that's inspired by urban, maybe one inspired by the outdoors. They've done an amazing work to give your video just a style using templates and save you a lot of time. The transitions are also very, very exciting. They also allow you now to share project files between users. So for example, you could start working on KineMaster and maybe you're halfway through the editing, but you've got to move on to a different project. You could send me the project files and I could finish the editing. That is very, very clever. And they also have introduced a new, very extensive library of copyright-free music. So KineMaster was always a very good tool. Complex, so not for the faint-hearted, but now with the templates and all the addition of collaboration and music, it's just back on the top of the list for me, Roger.
Fantastic. And, you know, that the translation thing's intriguing. Funnily enough, I subscribe to a TubeBuddy, which we featured on the show before. I have a sort of intermediate version of it. I think it's called the Star version. They've recently introduced a translation service, which is a higher up tier, so I can't use it unless I pay more. But that will do a similar sort of thing, and it does intrigue me as to whether it would be worth and whether it would help spread the videos wider if they did have the ability to have foreign language subtitles in there, French, German, whatever it might be. So it's you know, 𝗬𝗲 has done it, and TubeBuddy have done it. It's just intriguing. And of course, given that I'm really into video at the moment, I will definitely be having a look at KineMaster.
Excellent. Well, as I've said before, this is possible thanks to visionaries and pioneers of the distant and recent past. It is time to move on to This Week in History.
In 1931, President Herbert Hoover officially opens New York City's Empire State Building by symbolically pressing a button from the White House to turn on the building's lights.
Well, in 1939, Batman, the character created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, first appears in Detective Comics 27. The superhero became so popular that he gained his own comic book in 1940.
In 1975, the 70-minute TV pilot of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗁𝗂𝗃 is aired on the ABC network, introducing viewers to David Michael 𝗧𝗏𝗃, Kenneth Richard Hutchinson, 𝗬𝗏𝗃 𝗏𝗏, Captain Harold C. Doby, and of course, that car.
Well, in 1978, Gary Chewak, a marketer from Digital Equipment Corporation, sends the first unsolicited bulk email, better known as spam, across the ARPANET to promote 2 upcoming product presentations.
In 1983, Microsoft introduces the 2-button Microsoft mouse for PCs. Nearly 100,000 units of the device were manufactured at the time, but only 5,000 were bought.
In 1992, ID Software Incorporated releases the game Wolfenstein 3D for PCs. The game became an instant success and launched the first-person shooter genre, still popular today.
In 1994, Steve Jobs introduces the iMac computer at the Flint Center Theatre, marking the return of Apple and the start of adding the letter I to just about every product it created.
In 2000, President Bill Clinton announces that precise GPS access will no longer be restricted to the US military, and the accuracy of civilian GPS devices would improve from 100 meters to 20 meters.
Wow. I know you want to talk about 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗃𝗀𝗃.
Oh
Pascal.
my God. I absolutely adored. I still do, by sheer nostalgia, the series. I mean, this was this Sunday afternoon family time. So 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗃𝗀𝗃, just before The Fall Guy, just before Wonder Woman, just before Buck Rogers. So that was like the afternoon sorted. And it's just a joyous experience to watch 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗀𝗃. But also they tackled really kind of hard-hitting subject matters whilst there was a lot of humor. And I just adored the car. I had the model of the car and I never played with it because I didn't want to scratch it.
Oh, that red car with the snazzy white sort of triangle stripe going along the side and then up over the top. That was just epic.
I wanted to have a car where you have to jump through the window to get in. I think I still do, really.
And you know the bit in the introduction, they kept it in the introduction title sequence. It was the bit where I think it was Hutch was running along at the top of a wall, and he jumps on top of the car, and apparently that was an ad lib on his behalf when they were filming it, and he almost broke his back, but it was such a good. And they got a fabulous shot of him landing on the top of the car and obviously making a great big dent in the roof that they kept it in, and it obviously featured in pretty much every single title sequence of the whole run. I
mean, obviously, I watched it in the 80s. This was obviously made in the 70s. It feels very 70s from the fashion and everything else. I mean, 𝗏𝗏𝗃, what a character! Ran for 4 seasons, just under 100 episodes. I think it was about 92. Give or take. But the music, both in terms of the closing and opening credits, but also throughout the series, was just wonderful.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do remember about 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗀𝗃 is that each series had its own theme music.
That's right, yeah.
So I'm pretty, I would have to go and look it up, but I'm pretty sure the first series was actually quite a rocky sort of da-da-na-na-na-na-na, something like that. It reminded me a bit of the theme to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, actually, the James Bond film. And then later series had much sort of janglier and sort of more hip-hop type music. So there was definitely a different theme music to each series. And maybe that was reflected in the style because, again, maybe the memory's cheating. And, 40-year-old TV series, it's very likely that the memory is cheating. But I seem to remember 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗀𝗃 was quite hard-hitting and quite violent in the early series. But did it actually get a little bit more light-hearted and a bit more jokey and a lot more fun as the series progressed?
I think that's the characters and the actors themselves settled into the characters, should I say. I think so. But also we were approaching the 80s. It was the end of the 70s. We were just making steps away from the Vietnam War for the US audience. And that kind of tongue-in-cheek, the kind of buddy style with the captain always on your back and so on. But interestingly, when it started, some of the older American audiences, and maybe be around the world, didn't like it because, sorry to say, Roger, it was deemed to be promoting homosexual relationships.
Oh, what? 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗀𝗃 were supposed to be in a relationship.
Yeah, they were hugging far too much at the end of each series, and they were far too close, sitting far too close to each other, maybe whilst being shouted at by the captain. Absolutely hysterical.
Yeah, we probably better talk about some other news, otherwise this is going to become like the film marketing part of the show, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I wanted to once again suggest to you that marketers spoil everything. It started in 1978 with, I suppose that, Gary wanted to do well and impress his bosses by saying, "Oh, we've got 2 events. Well, I know what I'll do. I'll send a mass email to the ARPANET, which we've just been given permission to use by the army and universities, and annoy everybody on the list."
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I seem to recently have had a massive increase in the amount of spam email that I'm getting. 2 years after GDPR came in, I seem to get more and more emails from people that I've never subscribed to before. I don't know how they're getting away with it. Maybe I should report a few of them. But yeah, I mean, it's Gsary Vaynerchuk often says that marketers ruin everything. But, I keep coming back to that mantra that I have, that if you as a customer, so me as a customer, if I don't like somebody spamming me with emails, why would I as a marketer feel it's all right to do it to my customers?
I don't know. It's such an anomaly. And I know that Gsary Vaynerchuk tells a story when he was talking to a customer of his who wanted to do essentially mailers, and said, well, let me ask you, when you go home tonight, see your kids and your wife, is the first thing you think, oh, I can't wait to see what mail I've received or what junk mail I've received. They go, I hate the bloody thing. And say, well, but you want to treat your customers the same way. It's just something that I don't fully understand. Could I ask whether you ever played Wolfenstein 3D on your PC in the 90s?
Oh yes. Oh, yes. That and Doom.
Yeah.
And then there was always the 3 shooters that I remember. There was, I think this is the right order. Doom was maybe first, then Wolfenstein, or was it the other way around? And then Duke Nukem.
Yes.
And Duke Nukem was the one that I eventually just absolutely adored and played that for several years before it sort of became a little bit old-fashioned. And, that was a true first-person shoot-'em-up. And it was actually quite an adult-type game as well. Quite a lot of swearing in it as well.
Yeah, I mean...
But those 3 games, definitely.
Well, it's all the kind of blood spluttering was almost, I suppose, the beginning of also the Mortal Kombat franchise.
Yeah.
Was there ever an end to those games? I mean, I was never good enough to go very far, but was it one of those I would keep going with different levels, or there was definitely the big boss fight and that's it, you could win the game?
Yeah, I got to the end of Duke Nukem. I don't remember getting to the end of the others, but there was, with Duke Nukem, there was definitely a big bad boss at the end. And the great thing is when you defeated it, it then opened up yet another level that you could go and play,
right.
which there was nothing worse in it than you just faced, but it was almost like you got a reward for beating the final big boss, and you got another level to go and explore after that.
And finally, also, we're going to say thank you to Bill for the GPS. I didn't realize it was, that imprecise, but also thinking 21 years later, I just don't know what I would do without either Google Maps or a GPS type device.
Absolutely right. Interestingly enough, just this last week, because the lockdown has been lifted to a certain extent here in Scotland now, it was the first time in over a year my wife and I have actually been able to drive up to Aberdeen to visit our son. And he's moved house since we last went up there, and the GPS was incredibly helpful in locating where he was.
Excellent. Right, Roger. I hope that's okay, but we need to move on. But thank you again for just going down memory lane in your company. And there's been some just amazing kind of recaps. And also thank you for allowing a longer than usual, review of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗪𝗏. I can't wait for the 4K box set to come out. That would be on my Christmas list. But let's go back into the present with the creator shout-outs. In this segment, Roger and I choose an individual, an organization creating amazing content and bringing value to their community. So, Roger, who is in the spotlight today?
Okay, Pascal, I'm going to shout out Andrew Lopez, and he does a video podcast similar to this, except there's a massive difference. His podcasts are never more than 3 minutes long.
Right.
It's called Elevated Conversations, and I have to thank another of our colleagues, John Asperian, for actually putting me in touch with Andrew. Now, Andrew, there's so many coincidences in this that it's absolutely delightful, but Andrew, when I originally spoke to him, was living in Los Angeles. Now, as you know, my sister lives in Los Angeles in Venice Beach, and that's where Andrew was living. But we then arranged for me to go on his show to do one of these 2 to 3 minute tips, ideas, and by then he'd moved to Edinburgh, believe it or not. And he actually is living literally 1.5 miles down the road on 𝗓𝗏𝗲𝗏 beach. So I absolutely love that. And once the lockdown's totally over, we'll be able to meet up and have a coffee. But these are really, really interesting. As I say, it's very snackable, 2 to 3 minutes, and there's very little introduction. It's literally just, what's your idea? And your idea can be a business idea, it can be a self-help idea, it can be a mental health idea, it can be a mini recipe, it can be whatever you like, as long as there's a point to it, as long as there's a mini story to it. And he's a really engaging guy. And he's got this really incredible ability to sort of see the point straight away and then suck it out and tease it and amplify it, all within this 2 and 3 minutes. And of course, he does one every day, which is quite hard to find a constant stream of guests, which is why he asks all of his guests, and John Esperian was one of the guests prior to me, to recommend him to get more people on his show. So do give it a look. It's really interesting. Not a format I've come across before. Incredibly addictive and incredibly just snackable, I guess.
Ah, super. Well, my kind of shout out is for another Andrew Turner on this occasion. Now, Andrew is the founder of English with an Expert, and he provides language services to an international audience who needs to prove their proficiency in the English language. Many of his customers will be doctors, architects, dentists, and others who want to emigrate to different countries, and they have to pass the test, something called the International English Language Testing System, which has also a very interesting acronym. And the reason why I chose Andrew, because Andrew, once again, is an example that you don't have to work in marketing to excel in content marketing, Roger. If there was ever an example for the expression zero to hero, which I hope you will not mind me using, Andrew Turner is that example. From someone who just understood the concept to becoming now a practitioner, it's been a delight to see his growth, but also his success over the past few years. So now he's a blogger, but he's also now a videocaster and podcaster. And he's taken his time, which I think is also a very important lesson for everybody. So every month he releases a news tracker article giving an update on the world of taking the English language test. He also has a kind of a company update, if you will, Roger, called Schools Out, each with their own different graphics, different style and so on, which is brilliant. He has every month templates and essays and kind of examples of homework that can prepare you for the exam. And every month, which I think is also very nice, it has a vocabulary article around different themes. He's just so active, and I think deserves a shout out. More recently, he started the podcast series called With an Expert, where he's talking to essentially organizations and individuals that would be a good complement to what he does, and it's taking really shape. And honestly, I just think Andrew Turner is a wonderful example of someone that, again, is not from a marketing background, but that's completely understood how to do content marketing.
Yeah, I often find that quite a lot of people who don't have marketing backgrounds are often better content marketers than marketing people. But anything with a focus on language, I'm just going through this phase at the moment, Pascal, where I'm fascinated by language again and writing, and that's why it's been reflected in some of the tech that I've looked at recently, and structure of writing, like humor and that sort of thing. So this is absolutely priceless.
Super. So to both Andrews, well done, and once again, thank you for the inspiration. Now, Roger.
Yes.
It's time for film marketing.
Wow.
Right, Roger Edwards. This is episode 39. We have reviewed our fair share of movies. We've covered all genres, from horror to action to thriller to intrigue. But this is, I'm pretty sure, the very first courtroom drama that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, A Few Good Men. So it is courtroom drama. I guess technically it's court-martial room drama, isn't it? Because the characters are in the Navy and the Marine Corps. But a relatively old film now. I mean, when we decided to do this film, Pascal, I mean, it's one of my favourite courtroom films of all time. One of my favourite films of all time, full stop. And then I was really quite shocked to discover that it was actually released in 1992. I just couldn't believe it was as old as that. So a relatively early performance for Tom Cruise.
Well, indeed, and like you, when I did the research, and I remember the movie so well, it feels it was more recent, but also, of course, it was more the memory of, I used to own the movie on VHS cassette, which is always a very strong hint. That was a long time ago, and somehow I never did replace it to a DVD or even Blu-ray. So in fact, the last time I would have watched a movie would have been late 90s, before I had to let go painfully with much tears. My VHS collection had to be either given away or thrown away, because I had to make room for DVDs and the rest. But the movie just left such an impression, which has been the case for most people, I'd imagine, including critics.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those movies that is just full of quotable lines. I mean, there are so many quotable lines. I often think I could probably recite the entire film myself. And actually, even though Tom Cruise is the headline, we've also got Jack Nicholson in there. And I mean, his part, he out of a two and a bit hour running time, Jack Nicholson's probably only in it for a maximum of 20 minutes, I would say. But my goodness, doesn't he dominate the 20 minutes that he's in. Similarly, you've got Demi Moore, big star in those days, Kevin Pollak, Kevin Bacon, Kiefer Sutherland, massive stars now. But none of them get to swamp the film and take it over as their own. It's definitely an ensemble. And in fact, ultimately, Tom Cruise's character doesn't have that much dialogue either.
That's fascinating, and we've got, therefore, to celebrate the work of both, firstly, the writer, to begin with, and then the director. Now, I did not know this until I kind of quickly did some research for today, that this was based on the play.
Yes, it is.
And I didn't know the play was based on real events.
Yes, it is.
So
yeah. And I think, I mean, without giving the plot away too much, but in the end of the film, the two guys who are accused of murder, I mean, the whole point of the film is that they do get convicted of conduct unbecoming a Marine Corps officer, and therefore they get dishonourably discharged. Now, apparently, the real story upon which the film was based, and the play was based, the equivalent person who was accused of murder and then didn't get convicted of murder didn't get dishonourably discharged. He was reinstated within the Marine Corps, and apparently that individual was quite annoyed by the way the film portrayed his character.
Right. Well, it makes sense, but equally, it had to be a work of fiction.
Of course.
So the writer Aaron Arkin worked, obviously. I think that was probably his first transition from play, as in stage, to screen. But then if you look at what he did afterwards, I think clearly he has a knack for things. So he did The American President with Michael Douglas, The West Wing, and of course later on The Social Network, directed by David Fincher. So obviously he kind of loves this idea of an institution that is all about covering up, and Jack Nicholson, I think, what a force. It's been quite interesting to be on set with him, suggesting that an older figure with authority who basically doesn't care much about the truth. I mean, obviously this is fiction. That would never happen in real life, really, Roger. But your point about, the different characters, the way in which Rob Reiner made sure that this was not a Tom Cruise vehicle, this was not a Jack Nicholson movie. Everybody, even the supporting cast, when they were on screen and when they were the dialogue, it was just compelling. And the 2 hour, 20 minutes just goes by so quickly.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those films where they have taken hours and hours and hours and hours and hours over each particular line of dialogue. There isn't a piece of dialogue in there that doesn't advance the plot, doesn't point towards one of the arguments they're making in court. Every single line is absolute perfection. And I think that is probably why none of the characters gets that spotlight. Now, Jack Nicholson, obviously, tour de force, as you've said. I think his performance in this film is... He's scary as well. That bit early in the film where he goes, "Of course you can have the report, but you've got to ask me nicely." and all of a sudden they bring the music in and they do the close-up on his face. And then the camera zooms out to Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise genuinely suddenly looks like a 15-year-old boy because Jack Nicholson is so scary in that moment. But I've also read people who think, he was just hamming it up. He was chewing the scenery. It was just a ham-fisted performance. But to me, again, in that last sequence, where he's, Santiago's death is tragic, but it probably saved lives. He's just, and then he's got, you can't handle the truth, and all of that stuff at the end is just edge of the seat stuff. And, I always hold my breath during that scene, even though I've seen it about 30 odd times.
But for a fact that the dialogue is inspired by statements that people like, the character of Colonel 𝗧𝗵𝗲 from memory, played by Jack Nicholson. You just know that what that generation was all about. That's how they spoke. I mean, the way he's so dismissive of Demi Moore when the first encounter, and when he discovers that, God forbid, Demi Moore is actually superior in rank to the character of Tom Cruise, and Jack Nicholson's character can't even cope with it and just laughs it off, thinking, well, it's just nonsense that we have to put up with right now, but I'm not going to go with it. And I think this is also about generation. This is about, the changing of times and new values that the movie is capturing. But for 1992, I think it was ahead of the time in terms of exploring what was around the corner.
Yeah, and a couple of things as well. 1992, before mobile phones, before, digital technology. And yet when I watch the film, I don't feel as if it's dated. Maybe it's because it's mainly set in a courtroom and therefore it doesn't rely upon digital technology. And, they do fly down to Guantanamo Bay a couple of times and there are a few scenes in people's apartments as they're preparing their defences, but you don't feel as if it's a film that is old because it hasn't got the tech in it, because it doesn't rely on tech anyway. And I think that's quite fascinating. And another thing which I think you would have expected a film like this, with the tension between Tom Cruise and Demi Moore, that at some point in the film they'd have got together. And I remember when I watched it the first time and she comes and she invites him to go out and they go out to a seafood restaurant, you just thought, he's obviously going to fall into bed with her and there's going to be a rampant scene and then it'll get back to the plot. And actually kudos to the writers for not doing that. And again, that was just, Demi Moore and Tom Cruise don't get it on.
Well,
wow,
you will have even more respect with the writer and the director when you hear that they were under pressure to make Demi Moore fall for Tom Cruise. And they basically push back and push back and push back, and to the point where the financiers, who clearly have no idea how to make movies, they just have the money, say, well, what is the point of having Demi Moore then if she's not going to get a kit off? And you kind of go, do you know what? Apart from deserving probably a punch in the face by either Tom Cruise or Jack Nicholson, or both, just leave us do what we do best, because it wouldn't advance the story. Can we quickly also mention Kevin Pollak, who I absolutely adore. Whatever he does, I think he does it well. I mean, I suppose you could say that to all of them, from J.G. Walsh, I actually like as well as Cuba Gooding Jr., of course.
Yes. I mean, Kevin Pollak's got quite a restrained role, hasn't he? He's the straight man, I guess, and the voice of reason.
That's right.
Interesting to see Cuba Gooding Jr. I recently saw Cuba Gooding Jr. in a film which has only been made in the last few years, and obviously is considerably older now. And I said to my wife, "Is that Cuba Gooding Jr.?" "Oh yeah, so it is." Yeah, so such a great cast,
great actor, and of course they'll work. Tom Cruise and Cuba Gooding Jr. will work again years later on Jerry Maguire. But so this movie was released at a very strange time. I wanted to get your reaction on that, Roger. This movie was released in December of 91 in the US, and then kind of ran its course, and was released in January, the 1st of January 92 in the UK. Actually, the premiere was in Manchester at the Old Odeon. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. That's not exactly a Christmas movie. That's not exactly the right time. Was it just simply what they had to do, or was there some kind of marketing angle in there which escapes me?
I don't know. I mean, you never, ever, ever, ever hear people having the old Christmas movie argument about Few Good Men, do you? I mean, it's like, oh, it's definitely a Christmas movie because he's eating an apple or something like that. But like you do with Die Hard, that's an age-old argument. But I didn't even know that, Pascal. I would have said if you'd have asked me that it came out in the summer.
No, I remember going to the movies to see it, of course, because you're right, the ensemble cast, which I don't think they do as well nowadays. Maybe it's just nostalgia that is taking over here. But certainly, as soon as I could, got the video cassette. Now, at the time, I was still working in a video store. What a job to have when you're a student. And we had to buy several copies because they would go so quickly. But certainly, I never then moved on to the DVD that was released in 97. So 97 being the year where the first DVDs came out. So it must have been one of the first few movies to get that kind of transfer over. But yeah, I mean, what a movie. And when it comes to marketing, because I think we should talk about
that
marketing. And I've been reflecting on it. And I think for me, it is actually all about the trailer, because what else was there in 92? Yeah. I think the poster is kind of, sure, why not? The faces of Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson and Demi Moore. But actually the trailer, I would recommend people, and we might actually put the link in the show notes, if you watch it and look at the structure and how they share the story just enough, but also to your point, even in the trailer, Tom Cruise may say about 3-4 words, if that.
And again, I've already said this in the show today, that sometimes the memory cheats. So I can't put my hand on my heart and say this is absolutely what happened. But that absolutely and utterly remarkable bit at the start during the credits, when you've got this long line of riflemen stood on the parade ground, and they sort of do this incredible choreographed way of flipping their rifles onto their shoulders, but it goes down the line like a line of dominoes, and the timing is just absolutely incredible. And my wife, every time we watch this, it says, how on earth did they synchronize themselves so perfectly to make it look like a fluid movement? Now, I'm pretty sure that initially one of the reasons why this film caught my attention before we went to see it is that somebody, it must have been on TV, maybe it's in the trailer, I've not watched the trailer for a long time, but that sequence I saw before the film, and that was one of the reasons why I went to see it.
Interesting. The trailer, as it stands officially, begins with Jack Nicholson. Very cleverly, almost as a voiceover way. So you have the scenes for a very short while of, obviously, the scenes you've described. You've got, just sequences that suggest, this taking place in Washington. This is a courtroom. But you've got the voice of Jack Nicholson to kind of start it. And then, of course, you end with him losing it completely in a courtroom and Tom Cruise saying, I want the truth.
The truth.
And therefore, for an audience, you kind of go, well, and I think what's interesting as well about the trailer and the movie, unlike other movies, the audience knows as much as the characters. So we know what has happened to Santiago. We know it's terrible. We know that the family can't get through the walls and the kind of the way in which the army protects itself and kind of close ranks. So they try in obviously a different way, and Demi Moore wants to take on the case. And I think what is interesting about the movie, and I think there's an interesting hint about how to tell the story, your point about the content spotlight, which is that the character of Tom Cruise is flawed. In fact, I don't think he's really, he cares much, because that's going to go against what he wants, which is the lifestyle. He doesn't want to work hard at it. And this looks like a case that requires hard work. And you're right, between Demi Moore and Kevin Pollak, the characters, they turn him around. But so the trailer is also superbly in sync with the movie, which is rarer, because I think sometimes you and I would say, as part of film marketing, there's a trailer, and we move on very quickly because what is there to say? Or sometimes the trailer is actually misleading or shows you the best bits. But this trailer, which is why I want to insist on people, for research purposes, watch it, because it's superbly edited and tells a story in 2.5 minutes, perfectly matching the 2.5 hours of the film.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's we watched it again last night, Pascal, and again, absolutely edge of the seat stuff. That last 20 minutes where Tom Cruise cross-examines Nicholson in the courtroom. It is just absolutely electrifying. Incredible performances.
Well, there you have it. I'm already exhausted just thinking about the film, and I'm going to be watching it this weekend, of course. But this was episode 39. I promise it was a big one and a good one, and I do believe we, met that goal. Roger Edwards, thank you very much for being such a wonderful co-host. Viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. Please leave comments and suggestions in usual places. Until the next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards.